Tonight on the Politics Hub, I must take responsibility. The Archbishop of Canterbury resigns after a damning report which found the Church of England covered up sexual abuse. Keir Starmer says victims of the serial abuser John Smith, who ran Christian summer camps, have been failed very, very badly. A heartbreaking choice. MPs will get a free vote on assisted dying legislation. Campaigners say the proposals are compassionate, but we hear from one MP who says the bill will lead to people feeling obliged to end their lives. Donald Trump begins to appoint his cabinet. What do his top team picks mean for the shape of his presidency? And, cliché alert, they think it's all over. It is now. As Gary Lineker steps down after 25 years of Match of the Day, we look back at other institutions from the 90s that have stood the test of time. And Raymond Kishji, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday. I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. I hope you enjoyed that little look into our invisible chairs. They are in the studio now, I can assure you, which is good news. Now, we are starting the programme tonight with the news that the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, is resigning over his handling of abuse allegations that were previously covered up by the Church of England. Well, the details of the case are pretty horrifying. It centres around a barrister, John Smith, who ran Christian summer camps and who is believed to be the most prolific serial abuser associated with the church. It's thought 130 boys were his victims over 5 years. 5 decades, I should say. 130. Just let that sink in. Now, a report said that Archbishop Welby could and should have formally reported the abuse to the authorities in 2013, when he first became aware of it. Today, he's resigned, saying he feels a profound sense of shame at historic safeguarding failings at the Church of England. He also writes in his resignation statement, the Mackin Review has exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smith. When I was informed in 2013 and told that police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. It is very clear that I must take personal and institutional responsibility for the long and re-traumatising period between 2013 and 2024. Well, earlier I spoke to the Bishop of Stepney, that's the lead bishop for safeguarding and the chair of the National Safeguarding Steering Group.
I understand and respect why Archbishop Justin has chosen today to resign. I think he understood that in order for safeguarding in the Church of England to be able to move on, to create new foundations, that had to happen. And I also believe that he did it because he wanted to say that what victims and survivors have experienced is deeply important and causes us such sorrow and sadness that he had to express that. And I understand, therefore, that that's why he resigned today.
I read his resignation letter, and honestly, I'm not really clear in it why he's resigning. I mean, I know why he's resigning, but it doesn't really come through in the letter. You know, it gets closest when he says, when I was informed of the abuse in 2013 and told that police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. It's very clear that I must take personal and institutional responsibility. It doesn't really sound like he's saying that he's done anything wrong.
So Archbishop Justin's been really clear that he wasn't aware of the abuse of John Smythe before 2013. But when he's reflected on what happened since 2013, in terms of pursuing that as kind of energetically as he feels now he should have done, I think he recognises that there's a perception, and I think he's come to understand that himself, that he could and should have done more. And so that is why he's resigned today.
He doesn't say that in the letter, though. He doesn't say he could and should have done more, does he? He just said that he believed that an appropriate resolution would follow.
He did believe that the police were taking care of this, and I think we have questions about why things haven't been taken up in terms of police action. But I understand that he's taken personal and institutional responsibility because he wanted to say how deeply sorry he is for the part that he has or hasn't played in it. And I respect that that's what he's done.
John Smith, accused of abusing 30 boys at his home in Winchester, moving to Africa and then abusing up to 100 boys aged between 13 and 17. And we're talking here about sexual abuse, we're talking about beatings, we're talking about thrashing, psychological abuse. First reported in the 80s, Justin Welby says he found out about it in 2013, but there wasn't a formal report to police from the church. The police only launched an investigation 4 years later after a Channel 4 report. I mean, this is a shameful period for the church.
I understand really clearly that this is not only about the truly dreadful abuse of John Smythe to all of those boys, children, young people. It's also about the cover-up of that abuse at the time, and it's also about not having done enough after it was reported. Now, Archbishop Justin did, I understand and I believe, really believe that it had been reported to the police, but it seems that that referral wasn't made adequately and therefore that hadn't been followed up well enough by them. And that's what he's referred to when he's talking about taking that personal responsibility.
It's not like reporting a stolen bicycle. You're talking here about 130 boys being abused systematically. And, if nothing's happened over like 10, 20 years, don't you think it's worth a follow-up? I mean, I just can't really get my head around it.
So when I read the Making report, I shared similar, feelings to what you're describing. The kind of sense of horror that could happen, that was allowed to happen, that anybody would want to act like that. So for me, in particular, reading the parts that describe those children walking the garden path to the shed where truly dreadful things happened, that made me weep. It makes me angry, and I think it makes many people angry, and that for me is the impetus for change that has to happen. And so yes, it is appalling, and it has to lead to change.
You clearly feel very deeply about this. You wouldn't be doing the job that you were doing if you didn't. It's not an easy job. Does it make you feel, I guess, ashamed of the institution at some points that it's so much of a big part of your life?
For me, safeguarding is a barometer of the health of the culture of the church, and if we're getting that wrong, then we are failing in who we are, who we should be as a church. We are about the gospel of good news for the poor, the broken-hearted, those who are hurting. And it's really clear that we failed by allowing that abuse to happen and by allowing it to be covered up. And so, yeah, I feel deep shame and sorrow, and that is why I'm doing this job. It's hard, but I can't begin to imagine what it feels like to be a victim or survivor of abuse. That's what's really hard, and we have to change for the victims and survivors.
Is there a particular problem with the church about, we've seen obviously cases like this before?
I'm absolutely clear that we have to admit that there is a problem, and there has been a problem with the church, with abuse and with responses to abuse. I think we know we're not the only institution that's struggling with that, but that's not an excuse. That's just a kind of comment on the times that we're in, where at last it feels possible to talk about abuse and to address that at the level of society. The problem of abuse in the church is a whole church problem, and therefore it has to be a whole church response. It's about culture, it's about leadership, it's about theology. So yes, abuse matters, but the whole context is what needs to change.
I'm interested in how the church deals with safeguarding, as a organisation. It's in most of these big institutions, there's like an independent body that you can kind of refer yourself to, or you can look to them to give you advice to rule on things. Is that the case in the church?
That's where we're heading at the moment. So we invited Professor Alexis Jay to do a review, to report on the state of safeguarding in the Church of England. And what she said was tough, rightly tough. It was really hard-hitting. And she made various recommendations around independence in safeguarding. Now, there's a response group working really hard at getting that right.
I mean, in some ways it would have been useful to have had it earlier. You look at Archbishop Welby, for example. He said, he didn't make the decision to resign immediately, that he effectively was just talking to a few of his colleagues and they told him it was going to be okay. I mean, it sounds like a bit of a closing ranks almost.
I know that Archbishop Justin is a really thoughtful and prayerful person, and I know that he will have considered this really deeply. And that does have to involve taking advice from a whole variety of people inside and outside the church. I think that's right. I also think that he needed to weigh things really carefully, and I'm really clear that one person's resignation does not solve this problem. This is about wholesale change. So I welcome where we've got to today, with sadness, but I welcome it because I think it does give us a way to move forwards. And it says to victims and survivors, we know that we've got this wrong, and we will change.
What would your message be then? You talked about weeping over those little boys going to the shed. What would your message be today to those boys or to other victims who might be listening to this?
I want to offer my deepest, real, heartfelt apology and sorrow and regret at what has been so truly dreadful. There aren't words that describe how I imagine how people are feeling or what has happened. And I want to say to them, we are committed to change. I want to get that right. I want to do it as fast as is wise. I don't want to rush into something that thinks, here's a solution. That there is no, there's no magic wand. But with proper deep engagement, with proper feasibility work, with bringing in experts in governance, in culture change, in legal aspects, in data privacy, that this is multifaceted. I do believe that there's a way forward, but what I really want to say is I'm committed to that change happening.
And just finally, what do you think the legacy of Archbishop Welby is going to be?
I have appreciated working with Archbishop Justin over the 18 months that I've been in this role. I know that he has a huge personal commitment to safeguarding, and that he's tried to bring in things, including independence around safeguarding, that will make a difference in the long term. There's so much else that others will speak to as well about his legacy in the Church of England and globally. It's been really important, but I understand why we are where we are today.
The Bishop of Stepney there reacting to the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury and speaking more widely about safeguarding and abuse within the Church of England. I also spoke to the Energy Minister, Michael Shanks, earlier for his reaction to that resignation. Thank you so much for being on the programme. I'm keen, of course, to talk about your brief, about climate, about COP, but before we get to that, I'm just keen to talk about Archbishop Welby, who's obviously resigned today. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think obviously the first thing to say is our thoughts are with all the victims and survivors on this issue, which has been going on for such a long time, and I think many of them have not had closure. Whether today will bring that or not, I don't know, but our thoughts are with them anyway. Fundamentally, the issue of who leads the Church of England is rightly a matter for the Church of England, and we won't be getting involved in that. As a government, it's for them now to decide what the next processes are to choose the next Archbishop.
Is there questions that we should be asking about how our institutions deal with these kind of terrible allegations, reports, and then, of course, facts that actually happen? The thing that's really sort of struck me about this case is the sheer number of young boys who are involved in it. 30 in Winchester, up to 100 in Africa. And yet, this is something that for decades there has been no justice. I mean, we need to ask some real questions, don't we, about, yes, the Church of England, but also our institutions and our society.
Well, I think that is a really important point. And look, we've seen so many of these reports over so many years now of historical abuse, but also of more recent abuse. This isn't something that is consigned just to the past. We do need to do much more. I think the danger is often these reports are published and there's a lot of scrutiny at the time. The actual implementation of the learning maybe isn't always followed through. But crucially, I listened to a number of the victims today talking about this. Their point is this is about culture as much as procedures and regulations. It's important, of course, that we do everything we can to improve safeguarding procedures in all organisations across all our public life. But the culture is really important as well, in that sense that it's everyone's responsibility to keep people safe, and that you can't turn a blind eye, you can't think someone else is going to deal with this, I don't need to do it. Everyone has a responsibility here. I think that's a lesson not just for the church, but for all organisations to make sure we can keep people safe.
It is a really good point. The other thing as well is the police, because yes, the church may not have made official complaints to them early, but there were reports made to the police, and not that much seems to have been done for a while.
Well, I don't know the details of the investigation. I think, look, with all of these cases, one of the things that I find hardest, and I've had casework from constituents about this, is that sense of not being believed. And we know that that's the case for victims now as well. This isn't just historical. And I think it's really important that when someone makes a complaint or when there's obvious signs of this, that safeguarding is taken seriously and that people don't assume that these aren't important or serious moments. They really are. And there's always, when we see reports about issues like this, there's always missed opportunities. Of course, those missed opportunities represent more victims, and we need to do much more to tackle that.
Yeah, particularly when you think about how difficult it must be for these people to make a complaint, to go public, to face up to their abuse, particularly if they're young. As well. Thank you very much for talking about that. I know that you're here to talk about COP and climate change. Just talk me through what's been announced today.
So today was hugely important. The Prime Minister is at the COP conference demonstrating that Britain is once again leading on climate change across the world and the change that we need to see. He's announced today that our target will be 81% of reductions in emissions. That's an ambitious target. It's one the Climate Change Committee has said is ambitious, but also has said it is achievable. And everything that we've been doing since we came into government in the 4 months that we've been here has been about moving towards that climate leadership again, but crucially recognising that our economic growth is also our climate justice point. And so today we've also announced a Clean Industry Bonus, which is about trying to make sure we bring as much of the supply chain to this country so that the clean power infrastructure that we're going to build over the next 5 years also brings the jobs to this country and delivers the economic justice that we need across the country as well.
Keir Starmer was obviously at COP. Were you disappointed to not see more leaders from some of the world's largest economies there?
Well, it's obviously for each individual country to decide how they want to participate. There's representations from every country at COP. I think it was really important that the Prime Minister went this year to demonstrate that after a sort of period of declining enthusiasm, I think it's fair to say, by the previous government in this, that we were back taking this issue seriously. And look, these COP conferences are really difficult. What you need to do is bring together as broad a coalition as possible to achieve what we need to do.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? It's a bit harder to do that if, Keir Starmer's one of the only leaders from the big countries there, isn't it?
Well, but I think there is a consensus on where we need to go with this, and the COP is an important moment.
Is there a consensus, genuinely? Because I'll be honest, from where I'm sitting, it looks a bit shaky, particularly with what's happening in the States.
I think shaky is a good definition, but that doesn't mean that all hope is lost, and I think we do need to work together now to make sure that we hit these targets. Look, we're in the most decisive of decades on this question. We're getting perilously close to that 1.5 degree warming that becomes catastrophic for us as a planet. We've all got to work together to make that happen. I think that's why it's so important that whatever other countries do, Britain is demonstrating that we are once again wanting to lead on these issues. And look, there is also some self-interest in this for this country, because as I say, the economic growth that we want to see is also driven by the transition to clean power by 2030. It's why we're not agnostic as a government on an industrial strategy, partly to get us to clean power by 2030, partly to make sure we deliver skills and jobs for the future.
While I've got you, can I also ask you on assisted dying? Because it's something that I know all MPs are going to be wrestling with at the minute. It's such an important vote coming up, and everyone's going to have a different opinion on it, a different belief on it from their own experiences, their own beliefs. Where do you stand on the issue?
I do really wrestle with it, actually. I don't have a firm, fixed view on it at all, and I know, speaking to a number of my colleagues, they're in the same place. And I've had more emails on this subject from my constituents than any other, and probably about 50-50 on both sides. Some with really personal stories about why they think this is necessary, and others with real personal experiences, particularly from the medical profession, of why they think this is a challenge. I think ultimately I'll vote against the legislation when it comes, because I'm not convinced that the legislation provides enough safeguards, and I am worried about the kind of slippery slope that we potentially get. But I also absolutely recognise those who are suffering at the moment and who want to have some control over the end of their life. I think the important thing is we don't think it's assisted dying or nothing else. We need to invest in the palliative care that gives people a good death, and that is a really important thing. I also think what's really important about this whole conversation is we talk about death a lot more, because we talk about healthcare a lot. We don't talk about the inevitable, which is we're all going to have an end of life at some point. And that should be as caring as possible, and we need to invest in the system to deliver that.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The Liberal Democrat spokesperson for women and equalities and also for Scotland, Christine Jardine, and the former Conservative MP, Roman Kishti. Great to have you both on the programme. Christine, do you think that the Archbishop was right to resign?
I think that was a decision for the Church, but I do think that now that they have to look to rebuilding trust. I think trust, as with all institutions who find that they have not behaved in the way that perhaps they should have done, or that they haven't addressed safeguarding properly, they then have to rebuild that trust with their own members, with the public, and I think that's going to be very difficult. Although I have to say, listening to the Bishop, I thought some of the things that she had to say, she recognised the need for change, and she said that, you know, the Church has to change, it has to take on board the reports, and I think that from the Church's point of view is something in which they can have some confidence and some hope. But I do think there's a long way to go, and I think in this country we have to get much better. We're hearing far too many examples of abuse going on in institutions for years, not being addressed. And I think we have to get far better at recognising when there's a problem and dealing with it then, making it easier for people to come forward, listening to them when they do, and trying to ensure that people get the safeguarding that they deserve, particularly children. Hearing it today and listening to one of the survivors this morning on radio, it's horrific.
Yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable when you hear the stories, it really is. But you're right, I think it is fair to say as well, fair play to the Bishop of Stepney. She's come out, she's fronted up, she's taken some tough questions on it. You know, she could have decided not to do that, so you have to give a bit of credit there. Why is it that so many of our institutions seem to be so bad, I guess, at just dealing with these kind of things?
Well, I think the first thing I would say it's on the question is, did the Archbishop of Canterbury have to resign or not? I don't think he had to resign.
Interesting.
I think it shows the character of the person who deeply, passionately cares about the Church. You know, if one looks at the procedure, if he says, well, I followed a procedure in 2013 and I asked if the matter had been passed to the police and social services, and the answer was yes. And then one takes into account that this had been highlighted in the 80s. Well, he wasn't the Archbishop in the 80s. He's only been Archbishop for 11 years. But it shows the character of the person who says, look, with regards to myself being at the top, I take responsibility. It's about accountability, and it's about, you know, what went on was unacceptable. And therefore, that takes courage and leadership. And I dealt with the Archbishop when I was the British Prime Minister's Special Envoy for International Religious Freedom. And therefore, you get to sense, you know, a person's character. So for me, you know, with Archbishop Canterbury, he was somebody who passionately cared about the Church. And on this occasion, looking at it from a politics perspective, you know, some people may have tried to write it out. But he said, look, in the best interest of the Church, you know, I take responsibility. And with regards to what happened, you know, it's he felt he followed procedure, but what went on was unacceptable. In answering your question with regards to why are we in a situation where so many institutions, you know, find themselves in this position, and I think it's how are these matters dealt with. You know, my heart goes out to all the victims. What's gone on is shocking and it's horrific. And therefore the question is, you know, how do you then deal with this situation where when people come forward with concerns, how are they dealt with? The Church is now having an investigation now with regards to the procedures put into place. But absolutely, I think the government can play a role with regards to the different select committees on how these matters should be dealt with. But absolutely, the system has to change.
I get the sense you disagree with a bit of that. Is that fair?
I think it was a decision for the Church, it was a decision for the Archbishop. But I think in any organisation, if you discover that there has been wholesale abuse, which is by this individual, then you have to recognise that something was wrong. Something was wrong in the structure, something was wrong in the safeguarding in that organisation. And the people in charge have to take responsibility for that. And I admired the fact that the Archbishop has done that. He said quite clearly that he takes responsibility. And if we're talking about why are we having the problem, perhaps it's because people are not taking responsibility.
Thanks both very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. The government will allow a free vote on assisted dying legislation, with MPs set to debate the bill later this month. I'll be speaking to one MP who's against the proposals.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back. The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing. A towering monument to the China dream and its demise. From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart. China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world. Mass protests forced the president to flee. The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor. Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child. The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them. A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide. Sydney's floodplains underwater again. This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello, welcome back. Now to when politics really is a matter of life and death, changing the law to allow people to end their own lives. Now, the government is going to allow a free vote on the assisted dying bill later this month. So let's just run you through some of what's included in that bill. So the bill stipulates that terminally ill adults must express a clear, settled and informed wish to pursue assisted dying without coercion or pressure. 2 independent doctors must approve. They must be satisfied that the person in question is eligible. And a High Court judge must hear then from at least one of those 2 doctors. Now, the bill then goes on to say that the drugs to end that person's life must be self-administered. So, in other words, they have to give them to themselves. Breaking the proposed law under the bill would also include a 14-year maximum prison sentence for coercion. So let's get a little bit more detail on this huge vote that is coming in the House of Commons. We're joined now by our political correspondent, Liz Bates, to run through some of the details. I have to say, I've spoken to quite a lot of MPs about this, and so many are really wrestling about what to do.
Oh yeah, there's still so many MPs that are undecided. I think one of the really interesting things about this is because it's a free vote, because it's brought by a private member's bill, the politics is done so differently. So it's not adversarial, it's not party politics. MPs really have to, and they don't do this that much, think for themselves, reflect. They're not told by their party how to vote, and so they will be considering all the different arguments. Some will vote along religious lines. A lot of MPs, and you'll have heard this, Sophie, will be thinking about personal experiences they've had with loved ones. The numbers, I think, could be really interesting because we've voted on this before. We've discussed it many times in British politics. The last vote was in 2015. I think no hope at that point of this getting through. 330 MPs voted against, 118 in favour. The rest didn't vote. This time, I think it could be a lot closer, but it will depend really on that huge cohort of new mostly Labour MPs. And so they are the ones that are undecided. They are the ones that people like Kim Leadbeater, who's brought this bill, and her supporters need to win over. That's why all those safeguards have been announced in the bill. They think that that could be one of the ways to persuade those MPs. I think aside from that, on the other side, there could be an issue, and lots of MPs have spoken to me about this. They are worried that there isn't enough time, there isn't enough time to scrutinise the bill, there isn't enough time to really reflect and think about this. Even though they are speaking to their constituents, that is a big concern. And I think, look, quite simply, they are brand new MPs. Some of them are concerned that this is too much, too soon. This is too much of a seismic law change, too much of a responsibility on them so early into this Parliament. So I think for some of them it could just be a matter of timing. But there'll be a couple of weeks of discussion, we'll see all of this play out, and then there'll be a second reading and a vote on November the 29th. So at that point, we'll really know what these numbers are, how much of a chance this really has of passing.
Yeah, we really will. And so, as you say, I think everyone brings so much of their own personal experience, their personal beliefs, thoughts to this debate. It's going to be an absolutely critical one. Thank you so much, Liz. Well, earlier today, the MP who's put forward the assisted dying bill, Kim Leadbeater, spoke to Sky News about the proposed safeguards. Let's have a listen.
There's a very clear line between the bill that I'm proposing and euthanasia, someone else doing the deed. This bill is about autonomy and it's about choice. So it has to be the decision of the individual and it has to be the act of the individual. And I think, again, that just creates that extra level of safeguards and protections for anyone who might have concerns about the bill. By the time the patient gets to that point, they've gone through a huge process of thinking about whether this is what they want to do. And also they can change their mind at that point if they want to. Yeah. And actually, the experiences that have been described to me, it's not a brutal process, it's actually a compassionate process with loved ones around you. And that's the kind of death people want, rather than, as I've heard many stories of, hours, sometimes days of people choking to death, vomiting, and you know, horrible circumstances. Yeah. And all that these people who have got a very short period of time left to live want is that choice.
Now, one MP who's been quite critical of the bill is the Shadow Work and Pensions Minister, Danny Kruger, who joins us now. It's great to have you here. So you're going to vote against. Just explain why.
Well, just listening to Kim there, I have great respect for what she's trying to do here, and her concern is for that, what she thinks of as a very small number of people who, at the very end of their life, want to have this option. Unfortunately, her bill doesn't restrict this new service just to that group. It's predicated on the idea that doctors can determine when someone's going to die, someone with 6 months to live. Unfortunately, it's just not the case that doctors can be so precise. Anybody with a serious condition who requires treatment can find a doctor to say that they are terminally ill. In fact, they are terminally ill if they refuse their treatment, if someone with an eating disorder declines to eat. And this happens around the world, in every country where this sort of law is enforced. So even on its current terms, I'm afraid the bill is not tight enough. It's impossible to be tight enough. I'm also concerned about the principle that we're establishing. If we pass this bill, we are effectively saying, yes, some people are better off dead, and that doctors and judges should have the power to determine who those people are. I think it sends a terrible signal to the frail, to the disabled, to people with mental health conditions. And we see, in fact, campaigners from those communities universally opposed because they worry about the stigma that they already suffer from. If that were institutionalised and our healthcare system were effectively incentivised with this cheaper, easier option to free up beds, free up spaces in the healthcare system by putting people onto this compassionate pathway to a quicker death, I'm afraid we would be changing the whole nature of our relationship with medicine and with the government itself.
It feels like there's two sort of separate things to unpick slightly, the wider principle, but also the issues that you see with this individual bill. But I feel like I'm right in saying that it's the principle and the bill that you're proposed to, or is there a potential bill or safeguards that may make you support it?
Well, I'm open to that. I mean, we didn't see the bill that we're debating in a couple of weeks' time until late last night. I'm afraid it doesn't satisfy me. I don't think it would be possible to have a bill that was safe, and no law in the world is safe. So we could have hoped that here in the UK we could do what no other country has done and draw it sufficiently tightly. I don't think it's possible to do that. And you know, it is about principle as well as the practice. The practice flows from the principle. Once you've said that there is this new human right that some people can have, why shouldn't other people have it? You'd always find a doctor or indeed a judge to approve the extension of this principle once you've established it. And in practice, even without extension, the bill is dangerous, particularly to those people who might feel pressure internally to end their life because they feel a burden to others, or indeed, I'm afraid to say, because they are under pressure from family, or indeed the medical profession itself, which, as I say, wants to free up resources. So it's an enormous step we're taking if we pass this law. What we really should be doing, if I may suggest, is putting all this energy, all this political focus and a lot more money into supporting end-of-life care. The reason we have this debate is because too many people die badly in this country. They really do.
I think that's something that everyone can unite around.
Well,
right?
indeed they can, yes. So my view is if we had top-quality palliative care for everybody, nobody would need to seek to end their life early. They could die naturally with the support of the medical profession, well cared for, with their pain under good management. Once we get that system, then let's have a debate about whether we should include this option. But if we include the option first, we will find resources going into this option, and we will find palliative care suffers, which it does in other countries. And investment in palliative care is increasing around the world. But in countries that have assisted suicide as well, it doesn't increase as much because the resources goes into this.
I have spoken to quite a few MPs now on this issue, and I have to say I found them some of the most sort of engaging and moving often conversations I've had with MPs. You know, everyone comes to it with their own perspectives, and most MPs I think have thought very deeply about this. Do you have any kind of personal experiences that you're bringing to this, or this is more a kind of point of principle for you?
Well, the other side of this debate has a lot of personal stories, terrible stories of people who've died badly, and I always wish I could say to them, you know, the story, the case that you mentioned of your relative or your constituent who died badly, what really happened there? What should have happened? What kind of care could they have had? So I worry when people bring personal stories, unless we were able to properly examine the care that did happen and should have happened. I'm not sure how valid those stories are. I'm afraid as legislators we are here to legislate for everybody, including for future people who haven't yet, you know, approached this situation. My concern is for the untold, nameless people who I fear would be victims of this law. I think we should approach it from the point of view of those vulnerable people that we don't know who they are, who would find themselves being drawn into the scope of this bill, feel under pressure from the system. And in terms of those desperately sad cases we all do hear about, and yes, I've had relatives die very badly, you know, they shouldn't have done. The NHS should have done a better job in those cases, and that's, I think, where we should be putting our focus.
Do you have any sense on how the vote is going to go? It is quite hard to work it out because it's not a whip vote, so everyone is voting, you know, on their own personal conscience.
Yes, well, I mean, you know, on my side of the debate, we're doing what we can to try and understand colleagues' views. The other side will be doing the same. I think it's actually quite finely balanced. I think you've got a lot of new MPs. Over half the House of Commons is new at this last election, so they haven't got a track record of voting on it. But I think you've got a lot of new MPs who feel that this is an enormous step to be taking, and to be taking it in this way with a very short debate, with a bill that we've only had a couple of weeks to look at before it's debated and voted on, is the wrong process anyway. And while people might understand in principle the case for an assisted suicide law, they think this isn't necessarily the right way to go about it, and this bill itself has serious flaws. So I'm not sure how it's going to go. I think it is going to be pretty tough. I mean, I regret the fact that so much of the debate at the moment does seem to lean in favour of an assisted dying law, because many vocal voices have been making that case. I think the more people examine it, the more people, MPs and members of the public, look at what the bill would actually do in practice and how these laws apply in other countries, the evidence is the more they realise that this is not the path we need to go down. So while I don't think we should be debating this, we should be putting our effort into palliative care, not assisted dying. Actually, the debate is welcome because I think it's helping people to understand this isn't the right way to go.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme. Danny Kruger there. Well, of course, the debate over assisted dying is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Associate Political Editor of The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Right, let's bring in our panel again, shall we? Christine and Raymond. It's such a difficult thing to grapple with, but I actually feel the quality of the debate on this has been really high. MPs, you know, being very open, discussing in very heartfelt ways. Well, what's your own take on this, Raymond? Where do you think it should go?
I think there's a number of factors, and I think for me, I come from a faith perspective. You know, my father was an imam and grandfather was an imam, so I got brought up in a faith perspective. And therefore, life and death is a matter for God. And if you look at Scripture, and I was the United Kingdom Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Faith, and I dealt with all faith, Christianity, Judaism, Sikhism, Islam, and across the board, and the sanctity of life point is very much at the heart of it. But of course, the question is, we live in a democracy and there is a vote that is about to take place. And what I would say on that, it's with regards to the procedure that's being applied. So I looked at the House of Commons magazine. They published an article today by Alex Keane, King's Counsel. He dealt with the Cowan case on assisted dying I think in around 2017, which was looked at principles put forward by Lord Faulkner on assisted dying. Really tragic case. And he, as a King's Counsel who dealt with these cases, says there is real concerns with regards to how this legislation would be applied. Say, for example, you know, in the United States, in Oregon, you know, where the rules were initially drafted now, in some cases with arthritis, people can have assisted dying. If you look at the Netherlands, there was over 130 cases with regards to people with mental health issues and assisted dying. So the argument, principle, the issue also with the legislation, and thirdly, I think your point about where Parliament makeup is, there was an article on one of the front page papers saying this is the most ungodly Parliament of all time, noting the number of individuals who took their oath on Scripture and not Scripture. Which again could impact the debate. Absolutely. So I think that there's a number of factors there in this regard. So I think members of Parliament, yes, they're new, but they should have known this was coming up because this has been going on for a long time.
Yeah. Christine, what's your take on it?
Well, I have backed the bill from the beginning, and I completely respect what you're saying about faith, and I know that there are a lot of people who have concerns and who do not support it. And I have to say that in the position where I had a terminal diagnosis and I was concerned that palliative care may not be enough for me, because we have to accept that it isn't always enough, I don't know what I would choose. I don't know what my decision would be. But I don't think I have the right to keep that choice from other people. If they want that choice, if they want to have control at the end of their life, if they want to be able to say, if it gets too much, can I take the medication? It's not my right to stop them. And I think the way the bill is framed, with everything that's in it, all the safeguards that are in it, I think that's there. I don't agree it's there to get it through. I think it's there because we genuinely believe that we need those safeguards. But I also think it's worth noting that in countries where they have a similar situation to the one Kim's proposing, where it's terminal diagnosis, which is the thing, rather than unbearable suffering, a lot of people go through the process to get the right to choose, and then don't do it, because it's the reassurance that if it gets too much, they can do it.
It's an option that they have at the table.
Yes.
It's been really interesting, and I'm sure this is a debate that is going to be absolutely, you know, thought over, agonised over in the days and weeks to come. Thank you. Coming up next on the Politics Hub.
In Florida, they hate little Marco Rubio so much.
Well, Donald Trump's reportedly picked little Marco Rubio for America's top foreign affairs job. We'll be taking a look at who else could make it into the president-elect's top team next. Welcome back to the US now, where Donald Trump is in the process of choosing his top team before he re-enters the White House in January. Well, the president-elect has reportedly chosen this man, the hawkish Florida Senator Marco Rubio, for America's top foreign affairs job, US Secretary of State. And it could give some clues about how Donald Trump plans to shape US foreign policy when he takes office, because earlier this year, Mr. Rubio voted against a £1 billion aid package to support Ukraine. Well, who else could be part of the new administration? Let's have a little rattle through, shall we? Susie Wiles has been chosen as the White House Chief of Staff. She is the first woman in that post after managing what Donald Trump called his best-run presidential campaign yet. So she's rewarded with that super key job. Now, on Sunday, he named this man, Tom Homan, as border czar, immigration hardliner. He's reportedly also asked the Representative Mike Waltz, this man, to be his national security advisor. He backed Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election result. And Robert F. Kennedy, a man who might be familiar to you, potentially possible official or advisory role for him. He ran for president. He is also known for spreading some misinformation about vaccine as well, said to be reviewing candidates to lead America's health agencies. He could get some kind of role in that Trump cabinet as well. Right. Our US correspondent Mark Stone joins us now from Washington. Mark, we can tell an awful lot, can't we, about some of the people Donald Trump chooses to put around him?
We can indeed. Mar-a-Lago was left in the 1970s by the original owner to the state, and it was designed to be a winter White House. Instead, it was bought by someone called Donald Trump in 1985, and 30 years on, it is his winter White House, and it's from there that he is forming his inner circle right now. He has been there ever since his election win. He'll be up here in Washington tomorrow with a moment that we will all look at for any clues of body language, because he'll be in the White House, the real White House, with outgoing President Joe Biden. That's tomorrow, though today we're learning, as you say, a lot more about what his cabinet will look like. Marco Rubio is a man that the world stage will need to get used to, taking over from Tony Blinken as US Secretary of State. Yet to be formalized, and of course Trump likes to change his mind, but it appears clear that Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, and a man who is well versed in all things international, will now be America's top diplomat. An interesting choice, Sophie, because he is kind of an old school Republican. He is in the sort of centre lane of republicanism, or at least was, until he tacked towards the MAGA movement a few years ago. Not always a friend of Donald Trump. Little Marco is how Donald Trump used to refer to him as, a liar and other things too. Well, now he is to be Trump's top diplomat. In terms of how the rest of the world will see that, well, if you're in Russia, I think you'll be a little bit worried. He is a hawk. If you're in China, very worried. The Chinese have sanctioned him. If you're in London, Berlin or Paris, you might be quite pleased because of all the candidates that Trump could have chosen to be Secretary of State. He's kind of an internationalist, an Atlanticist, a man who 10 years ago, I should say, spoke to Chatham House and said, America and Britain have stood side by side for the last century because of our shared convictions that have united us around a common cause. And that cause is the defense of liberty and the spread of freedom around the world. Well, that doesn't sound very like the Donald Trump that we have heard on the campaign trail. I think in Downing Street, they will be quietly pleased that a man that foreign secretaries present and past know very well because they all visit him on the Hill when they come here. They will think that he is a man they can do business with, even if he is a surrogate for a Trump White House. The question, of course, with Rubio and all the others is how long do they last before they fall out with Trump and they are unceremoniously fired. So that's foreign policy. Mike Waltz is another Republican who is going to be the national security advisor. That now confirmed today. Again, quite a centrist Republican, centrist maybe the wrong word, but a mainstream Republican, or at least has been, again, hawkish on China, on Russia as well. There he is on the left, Rubio on the right. So that's international affairs. Domestically, well, very much more Trumpian on the domestic front. There are characters here who are very much part of the Trump world who will deal. There they are there, 4 characters, Kristi Noem, South Dakota's governor, bottom right, and others as well. On the top left is the new US ambassador to the United Nations, Elise Stefanik. Hardliners, Trumpian to the core, and the new inner circle for domestic policy for Donald Trump.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark Stone, there in Washington for us. Now, we really are rattling through the subjects on the programme tonight. We're going to the world of sport now, as the BBC's confirmed that Gary Lineker's season as host of Match of the Day is going to come to an end next year. If you can't imagine football without Gary Lineker, he's not going to be completely off our screens, because he has agreed to a contract extension that will see him present coverage of the 2026 World Cup and next year's FA Cup as well. Now, he took up the role all the way back in 1999. Yeah, 1999. So that got us thinking back to what else was hot and happening before the turn of the millennium. So, in true Politics Hub style, we're asking, is anyone else still partying like it's 1999? And to do this, we're going to have a little quiz, right? Oh. I know, don't...
You know I'm not good
excited.
at quizzes. Oh, my God.
It's multiple choice. It's absolutely fine. You ready? Right, first question. This is all things that happened in 1999.
OK.
Which football team...
Is that a clue?
Yeah, these are the answers, just to say. So we need to play... We'll play the answers afterwards, but that is a great clue. This is the football team which won the Premier League in 1999 when Gary began presenting Match of the Day. Is that Arsenal, is it Manchester United, or is it Leicester City?
Manchester United.
It was Manchester United. Very good.
I think the red gave it away.
I mean, I'll be honest, you did have a bit of a clue there. But you know what, you take it, a win's a win. I'm happy to give it to you.
Got it.
The number of trophies on the score there, 2-1. That was a Champions League final.
That is excellent intel. You should
and
get
just before that, Gillingham nearly beat Manchester City in the playoffs.
Right, question 2. So in the 90s, boy bands like the Backstreet Boys dominated the charts. But what star from another boy band was at the top of the UK charts during the first week that Gary Lineker presented Match of the Day? Was it Robbie Williams, Justin Timberlake, or Ronan Keating?
Robbie Williams.
Ronan Keating.
It was... Drumroll, please. It was Ronan Keating. When you say nothing at all,
right.
It's a solo hit. That's great.
Good thing with politics,
excellent
right?
boy band knowledge there from Christine. So, right, let's combine sport and politics now, which I think Gary Lineker always loved to do as well. Who was the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport in 1999? Chris Smith, Tessa Jowell, or James Pennell?
Tessa Jowell.
Chris Smith. It was Chris Smith. Ooh, it was Chris Smith. There we go. Chris Smith. Right, Chris Smith, now Lord Smith of Finsbury held the role, often called the Minister of Fun, possibly the best job in Cabinet. Right, coming back to football. Which of these current Premier League footballers and England internationals were born in 1999? Declan Rice, Mason Mount, or Reece James? Who was born in 1999?
Reece James. I'm just going with Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
I'll go with Declan Mount, just to be different.
All three of them born in 1999. Is a trick
so I get a
question.
point.
Yeah. Declan Rice, Mason Mount and Reece James, all members of the England team there. You can see the picture, all born in 1999. So it's a way of just making us feel really, really old. I should say that the person who came up with the idea for this quiz about the best thing about 1999, my top producer, Emily Kinder, also born in 1999. Hey. So all of the best things, clearly,
Brilliant.
In 1999. Gary Lineker, thoughts?
Well, I think he was somebody who, as a footballer, was probably remembered from 1986, the number of goals he scored. Brilliant footballer.
Do you think he pushed it too far with his politics at the BBC?
Yeah, I think he did. I think at the end of the day, are people in touch with their views? Yes. But doing the role he was doing at the BBC and the impartiality, I think he pushed it to levels he shouldn't. But does it take it away from the fact he was a brilliant presenter? No. Was he a great footballer? Certainly. But I think he pushed it too far.
The best thing I can say about Gary Lineker is I'm a Scot. And we tend not to look very favourably on most English footballers. but we do like Gary Lineker. I think the thing about Gary Lineker is to have gone through an entire football career and never been booked.
It's quite impressive.
It's quite impressive.
Nice guy.
That says something about him. And my biggest memory of him is from Italia 90, because that was when I really think England had their best chance of winning the World Cup. I know we've said since they should have won it in other years, but Italia 90 with Bobby Robson, and I think Gary Lineker in that was superb. And I'll probably go home now to a lot of bad press and emails. But I do
you
think...
both seem to know your football. Who are your teams? What's the...
Well, mine is Gillingham, my home team,
good,
which is... And we nearly beat Manchester City in the playoffs for Division 2. And they went up because they got the money from the UAE, and we're still fighting to go up the ranks, but we've got a big heart and we'll get there. The Premiership, for me, when I was growing up, it was Liverpool, John Barnes and Ian Rush and Peter Beardsley, and you stuck with them all the way through, and it's great to see them top the table.
How about you, Christine, quickly?
Well, I live in Edinburgh now, so we're more of a rugby city. We do have two football teams, but I'm a rugby fan.
More of a rugby girl. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you on Politics Hub this evening. Well, that is it from us tonight, but I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, though, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and I will see you tomorrow.